My band, Working Class Hussys, just returned from our first tour through the South, playing 8 shows in 11 days. Here's a short video summary. Friday, March 11th. I got up at 4 a.m. to do some chin-up bar workouts because, you gotta look good on stage. After that, my wife and band manager, Patty, and I drove to pick up our rented tour bus, which was actually just a 15-seater Chevy van. Then, after removing the 2 back rows of seats to make room for our gear when we were told we weren't allowed to do so, we picked up our guitar player, Greg Winka, bass player Brian Casale, and Brio Bukowski, who came along as a helping hand. Then it was off to pick up our drummer, Tony Mann, before embarking on an 8-hour drive to Abingdon, Virginia, where we had our first gig of the tour at the Bonefire Smokehouse at 8 that evening. It was a great crowd, and the owner, Doug, is a real fair and nice guy who takes good care of the musicians that play there. After the show, we had to repack the van and hit the road for a 2-hour drive to Knoxville, Tennessee for an early performance the next day. Saturday, March 12th. We finally arrived in Knoxville at about 3 a.m., found a cheap motel and crashed for a couple of hours before our second show, which was a live radio broadcast in front of a studio audience for a well-known show called the Blue Plate Special on 89.9 FM WDVX. It went really well and we made some new fans. After the show, we booked 2 more hotel rooms and tried to rest up briefly before our next gig that same night in Maryville, Tennessee. Unfortunately, about 10 minutes after we laid down, some numbskull somewhere in the hotel pulled a false alarm which demanded that everyone evacuate the building.
Attention! Attention! An emergency has been reported in this building. Please cease operations and leave the building utilizing the nearest exit or fire exit stairway. Do not use elevators. Repeat, do not use elevators.
Suspecting something fishy, we stayed put in our rooms until the alarm stopped. Of course, you can't get back to sleep after something like that, so we collected ourselves and drove to Maryville for our 10 o'clock gig at a restaurant bar called Barley's. I was worried how I was going to sing for a 2-hour set after already doing 2 shows in the last 24 hours, but our sound man, Greg, did a great job with the monitors so I didn't have to strain. We even had some new fans in attendance who saw our gig at the radio station earlier that day and just had to see us again. After the show, it was back to our hotel in Knoxville. Sunday, March 13th. After a few hours rest, we hit the road for a 3-hour drive to Whites Creek, Tennessee, just outside of Nashville for a brunch time performance at Richard's Louisiana Cafe. The heavy rain that day seemed to keep the crowds at bay, but our old Nashville friend, singer-songwriter Meredith Bliss Sinkoff came out to support us. That night we finally had some downtime, so while the rest of the band hung out in Nashville, I crashed in our hotel room. Monday, March 14th. Patty and Tony were starting to develop flu-like symptoms, so early that morning they went off to find a walk-in clinic. Unfortunately, that set us back several hours and we had a show that night in Fayetteville, Arkansas, which was still an 8-hour drive away. Fortunately, we made it to the gig on time. Fayetteville is a cool college town, home of the Razorbacks, and the crowd was great. After the show, we crashed in another hotel for a few hours. Tuesday, March 15th was a driving day. We were on our way to Austin, Texas for the Red Gorilla Festival, which was going on simultaneously during the South by Southwest Fest. However, we made a slight detour through Fort Worth so we could pick up some band merchandise that Patty ordered to avoid shipping costs. That night, we arrived in Austin amid the massive citywide party that is South by Southwest and checked into our 5th hotel in as many days. Wednesday, March 16th. Due to a lack of parking due to the festival, we hauled our equipment by hand about 4 blocks away to the Dizzy Rooster bar. But with a 1 in the afternoon time slot, when the rest of the town was still nursing their hangovers from the previous night, we didn't have a great turnout. That's okay because the band spent the rest of that day and night hanging out and goofing off together. Thursday morning, March 17th, we had to drive our guitar player, Greg, to the airport so he could get back to New Jersey for a wedding. Then we hit the road for Dallas, where our tour paths crossed with more of our old Nashville friends, a band called Witherword. They were on their way to Austin, we were on our way to Memphis, so we caught their show at a cool club called Eureka. After that, we decided to get a jump on the 10-hour drive to Hernando, Mississippi before stopping for the night at a hotel in Sulphur Springs, Texas. We arrived in Hernando in the early evening to spend the night with Patty's Aunt Susie and her husband Ron. They were extremely hospitable and put the band up for the night before our radio spot in Memphis the next day, which was only about 25 miles from where they live. Saturday, March 19th. After a much-welcomed home-cooked breakfast, the band headed to Memphis for a 2 o'clock radio spot on Memphis Radio with Diana Fryer. I had done several over-the-phone interviews with her over the last year and a half, and it was great to finally meet her in person. She and her partner Rick were extremely generous and gave the band a large cooler with food and goodies for the road. They were true professionals, but we had to beeline it out of there so we could make it to Murfreesboro, Tennessee that night for our last show of the tour at a very cool restaurant club called The Block. Working Class Hussys' former guitar player, Mike McClellan, drove all the way down there from near Allentown, Pennsylvania to do the show with us since Greg couldn't make it. And we were so glad he did because it was one of our best shows yet. The crowd loved us, and we even sold some merchandise. We all thought it was best to hit the road right after the show, at about 1 a.m., and just drive through the night for the 13-hour trek back home so we'd have time to unpack and wind down Sunday night. Everyone asks me if we had fun, and I'm not quite sure how to answer that. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's great meeting new people and old friends and making music for them. But it's also thousands and thousands of miles of constant driving, living out of a duffel bag, hauling hundreds of pounds of equipment back and forth, in and out and up and down stairs, while constantly rearranging the van so we can Tetris it in there precisely, usually at about 1 or 2 a.m. when you're too exhausted to see straight. It wreaks havoc on the vocal cords, and I would stop talking completely between shows to save my voice. And then there's the matter of using the van as your dressing room for the stage outfits. Fun? Actually, the road is grueling, but we can't wait to do it again.